it is May 9th today, and I thought I would do a quick video to show you how I am planting dahlias. Now, if you're new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I'm entering into my second year of cut flower farming. I am located in zone 6B in New Jersey. So in my zone, it is a little precarious to overwinter dahlias. Some people do it, some people are successful. It kind of just depends on our winters, and this winter would have been a great winter to overwinter. Now, the thing with me and dahlias is that I'm still deciding if there's something I want to grow in mass or in high volume. So one of the main reasons is just I don't like the process of digging them up, of storing them, and of having really all that responsibility. I'm just not good at that kind of stuff. So for me, if I want to continue growing dahlias in the future, I need to find a more low maintenance alternative, we'll call it. And so that's why I want to show you this process that I'm undertaking. Now, I saw Santa Cruz Dahlias post doing something similar with her seedlings because she hybridizes varieties, meaning that she grows from seed and she's basically breeding dahlias. So she's growing anything like 900 to 1,000 seedlings, and that's a lot of dahlias. So she has a method where she plants them in small pots and then puts them into the ground, so that way when they start flowering, she can see immediately if they're a keeper or, you know, she wants to take them out. And if she wants to take them out, then it's a lot easier to grab that pot out. So I thought, why don't I do some research on planting regular tubers into something like a 1-gallon pot? And from what I've seen, this could be a possible route. I've read people having success with it. I've also heard from people on Instagram saying that they did not have success with it. So I am going to do an experiment this year, and let me show you what that looks like right now. So I dug all of these holes yesterday, and I think there's something like 30 pots over here. These are relatively cheap, like landscaping pots. This is actually a little bit of a different style, but I think they're about 1 gallon. And basically they're made out of, you know, just normal plastic. I got these from my parents who bought some plants from their local nursery. And I basically dug holes. So this used to be tulips. I had just dug up a bunch of tulip bulbs before, and you can see that I missed quite a few because I got these out as I was putting in these pots. But so the soil was already relatively worked, so the holes weren't that difficult to dig. And then I put a little bit of compost into these pots. Now, what I've been doing is I've been laying in the tuber into each of these pots. So you don't lay the tuber very deep, you just lay it maybe like 2 to 3 inches, and then you cover it, and then you water it in, and then you see what happens. But I am planning on planting about 30 tubers this way, and then planting the rest of the tubers here the old traditional fashion way, which is just digging a little bit of a hole, putting the tuber in, and letting it have all of that space to grow. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail inside about why and some of the other things to consider with this method. That the pollen outside is really terrible today. But one thing that I do want to point out since I'm out here is you can kind of see just from the soil alone that I have very, very heavy clay soil. And I was reminded of that when I was pulling out my tulips. So you know, when you don't pull up your tulips with the full bulb, it ends up creating foliage for the next season. So it makes it very difficult if you're putting in baby seedlings or if you're even trying to overwinter some stuff. So I was trying to get all the bulbs out, and even then I don't think I did a very good job because of how dense that clay soil is. So I hit that same issue when I was digging out my tubers this prior fall, where, you know, the clay was so dense that I ended up puncturing a lot of tubers. I ended up getting masses of tubers out. It's annoying, right? It's labor intensive, it's annoying. So I'm trying to think of ways to basically expedite what will happen in the fall, because that coincides timing wise with tulip forcing season. I will probably have somewhat of a mobile toddler by then. I'll be back to work. So time is going to be very limited then. And so I'm trying to think ahead right now in terms of how I can help make my life easier in a few months. But let's talk about some other considerations using this method. All right, so let's talk about 3 reasons why I am planting dahlias this way this year. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I'm still someone who is not sure if I am someone who's going to be planting dahlias in volume here. And the main reason is because if I was in a zone where they were guaranteed to overwinter, I would totally do it, because one of the biggest manual inputs is digging out those dahlias, potentially cleaning them off and storing those dahlias. And storing those dahlias carries a pretty big risk, especially if you're a relatively new flower farmer. So that all being said, I somehow procured a lot more dahlias this year than I thought I would. So I had a couple of friends send me dahlias, and I also bought dahlias from a friend. For those who sent me dahlias, I'm nearly sure that most of those dahlias came from small farms in the US. So the risk of gal is not something that is top of mind for me, but the dahlias that I procured from my friend came from the Netherlands, and that always runs the risk of that disease gal. So I know that that person who I bought from actually pre-sprouts them to monitor for those signs and obviously eliminates those tubers, but you just never know. So when you plant in this kind of method, you are containing that risk or helping mitigate spread that risk of gal to the rest of your stock. So I will be putting a lot more of those tubers that I got from there into those pots. So that's the first thing, right? Where if you didn't have time like me to pre-sprout and look for those signs and you have to get them into the ground, this could be another option. The second reason why I'm planting like this is because, well, digging them up, I think digging up a pot is going to be easier than digging up tuber clumps. And last year when I was digging them up, I used a broad fork. As far out as I thought I was going, I was still puncturing some of those tubers. It was just really difficult to ascertain how far that clump migrated or grew and whether or not I was actually, even close to getting the clump without breaking off tubers. So I had a lot of casualties. Now, this may not matter because for most of us, we're not looking to plant by the clump. We only just need one tuber, right? But at the end of the day, it's still messy, it's time consuming, it's hard, and it's just at that time of year where you're also kind of burnt out. You just don't want to be doing it. I feel like there's just so many things to be doing in October that sometimes digging up your dahlias may not be at the top of your list, especially if dahlias are not your main crop. So the third reason why I'm doing this is actually for potential storage opportunities. Now, there are plenty of people who never clean up their dahlia tubers and let those dahlias sit over the winter in the clay soil that it comes up with when you dig them out. And that's what I did last year, and it worked really, really well. I did not do any cleaning. I didn't do any rinsing because I didn't want to risk mold, and I threw them into a smart pot with some leftover peat that my parents had and put them into a bin and shoved them underneath my garage, and they were fine. So I also know of people who basically take out or bring the pots with the tubers indoors into a more climate controlled environment and just leave it as is. And that is what I plan on doing. So the drawback with what I did last year was I had no idea what the varieties were for each of the clumps, because obviously there was clay on top, and I did not do a very good job of labeling where each variety went. So that's something that I'm planning on correcting this year, but I am labeling within the pot. So if I pull the whole pot out and then I have the variety there and I store it, it just makes for a much more seamless experience. And because we are planning on that detached garage being up by then, I should have enough space to store at least my top 2 to 3 dozen favorite dahlias in pots, assuming that this works. And that would mean much less hassle, because if the tubers are relatively small clumps, I could just put the pot back in, or I could obviously break apart the pot and then, divide in the spring. But it would just make for a much hassle-free type of storage situation and really eliminate that mental burden that I would normally have. Now let's talk about some drawbacks or some potential challenges that I might face. So those pots are not very big. Typically you see people putting dahlia tubers into 5-gallon, if not 7 to 10-gallon pots with success. And those with success, I typically see them growing them in grow bags. Now grow bags are like smart pots where the fabric or the pot is made of fabric. It's not plastic. And that fabric allows for a lot more air penetration. It basically means that when the plant is shooting out roots, when it hits the edge of the grow bag, it is going to send a signal to the plant to generate more roots versus wrapping around the pot. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of why grow bags work. This is not a grow bag in terms of what I'm growing in. It is just normal plastic. And so the concern is that the tubers might get too big. They might get deformed. Some of them might actually bust out of the pot, which would not necessarily be a big deal. But then there's also the concern that the tubers may not be able to get enough nutrients that they need from the ground. Now, I've done a lot of reading on this. The one other person who has had success, I will link it in the description below. She said that she grew in 1-gallon pots, and then basically, the holes on the bottom allow the feeder roots to go through to get the nutrients from the soil. So assuming that your soil has nutrients and, is going to be able to feed the tubers, and her experience is going to translate to mine, I don't really have that concern. Now, I've also read that the size of the clumps that the plant is going to develop might be variety dependent, might be dependent on just, your microclimate, your soil, like a lot of different factors that you can't consider. All I know is that I am not looking to plant dahlias the traditional way, because if I was, I would not scale in mass, right? So I'm trying to figure out alternative ways that would allow me to grow a relatively profitable and beautiful crop that would be one of my main crops in the late summer, early fall, right? Like everyone loves a really good dahlia, especially since now I'm selling to florists who would love to use dahlias for event work. So this becomes a much more appealing type of experiment for me, where I am willing to run that risk of losing either productivity, right? Because if it is the case where the dahlias can't flourish because they're in too contained of a pot, I'm obviously not only going to potentially lose some of those tubers, but I'm also going to lose productivity. But that is a risk that I'm willing to take, right? Because the results from this year will really dictate how many dahlias I grow for next year. Now, when I posted this onto my Instagram stories or Instagram feed yesterday, I got a lot of comments saying, let us know what happens here. I also got some stories from people who tried something similar. There was one person who warned me that she tried something very similar a few years ago and it was her least productive year. So again, right, there are risks that we all take. But if you've done this, I definitely want to hear from you in the comments. I want to hear, what size pots did you grow in? How much fertilization did you have to give those dahlias? How was it digging them up? How was it storing them? Just giving me your experience. I would totally appreciate that. So as usual, I will report back. You'll probably see the progress of this throughout the farm tours, but then I will obviously also do a wrap-up video. So my goal is to get all the dahlias in the ground by the end of the week. I don't know if that's possible realistically. Having a newborn, sometimes I'm like, what did I do all day? And I started breaking down the time, the hours. I am spending a lot more time in bed. I'm spending probably about close to 12 hours in bed, not obviously always sleeping because I have to feed at night. So within those 12 hours, I'm getting about 6 to 6.5 hours of sleep. And then during the day, there's obviously also feeding time, burping time, tummy time, play time. And when I add up all that time, I'm basically left with about 5 hours of time for me. That 5 hours includes eating, showering, folding the laundry, cooking, helping prep, whatever, if my husband's not doing dinner that night, and then anything else out in the field. So a good day for me looks like maybe 2 to 3 hours out in the field. Yesterday was a very good day. I got close to 4 hours out in the field. And what I do is I just bring the baby out in the stroller in the middle of the field. I cover her. She naps really well outside, but you know, when she starts wailing, I have to come back in, right? So on average, I would say realistically, I can expect 2 hours to really be outside and do all that work. And there's more than just the dahlias that are happening right now. I have to plant lilies and all that other stuff. So anyway, all this to say, I have a lofty goal. I'm hoping I can get all the dahlias in, and I will keep you updated. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions and experiences, and I'll see you in the next video.